Emily had always known her place in the family. It wasn't so much a position as it was a shadow, one she had grown used to, quietly lingering behind the brightness of her older brother, Ben. At 28, she had found her own path, co-founding a successful tech startup. But the pride that her family showed for Ben, his athletic achievements, his charming personality was the kind of attention Emily had never received. Growing up in a small suburban town, the expectations on Emily and her brother were clear. Ben was the one who could do no wrong. Whether it was excelling in sports, making friends effortlessly, or just walking into a room with that easy confidence, Ben was the one everyone gravitated toward. He was the son they had always dreamed of, the one who fit the mold of success that had been carefully crafted by their parents. Emily, on the other hand, had always felt different. She was quieter, more introspective. While Ben was out winning trophies, Emily was in her room, hunched over a laptop, her mind occupied with ideas and projects that no one else seemed to understand. She wasn't interested in the spotlight. In fact, she shied away from it. Instead, she found comfort in building things, in solving problems that others couldn't see. But that wasn't the kind of success her family valued. Their house had always been filled with praise for Ben. Their conversations revolved around his latest victories, his plans for the future, and his impeccable social life. At family gatherings, Emily was often pushed aside, her accomplishments dismissed with little more than a passing comment. "Oh, Emily's doing well in her tech job," her parents would say. It wasn't said with pride, more like an afterthought. A footnote. Emily had always tried to make her parents proud. She worked hard in school, focusing on subjects that she found interesting, even if they didn't fit into the mold of what her family thought she should pursue. She studied tech and engineering, quietly building skills that eventually led to the creation of her company. But all the long nights spent coding, brainstorming with her co-founders, and building a team, none of that ever seemed to matter. She wasn't Ben. She wasn't the one everyone talked about, the one who got all the praise. At first, Emily thought if she just kept working hard enough, if she stayed behind the scenes and helped others shine, her parents would finally see her. They would see how much she was doing, how important her work was. They would be proud of her, just like they were of Ben. But it never happened. No matter how much she achieved, no matter how successful her company became, the praise always seemed to find its way to Ben, and Emily was left in the background. It wasn't just her parents who didn't seem to understand her. Her extended family, too, had a clear hierarchy. The family gatherings were always the same. Ben was the center of attention, and Emily was the quiet observer. At holidays or birthdays, the conversation would always turn to Ben first. "Ben, you look so good. How's your job going? How's the girlfriend? I hear she's great." And then, when they remembered Emily was there, it was a quick, almost absent comment. "Emily's in tech. Right. She's doing well. I think she's happy." The comparisons weren't always overt, but they were always present. The unspoken feeling of inadequacy, the sense that no matter how much Emily did, it would never be enough. Her parents, her extended family, even her friends, always seemed to see her as the quiet, diligent one, the other sibling, the one who didn't quite fit into the picture they wanted to paint. It wasn't that they were cruel, but it was clear that Emily wasn't the one they were proud of. She had tried to explain her work to her family before, but it was never quite understood. The tech world was a mystery to them, and Emily's role as a co-founder of a growing startup didn't seem to hold the same weight as Ben's achievements. To them, the idea of running a company was nebulous, intangible. They couldn't see the significance in it the way they could see the success of a well-established career or the achievement of a gold medal in sports. But despite the lack of understanding, Emily had always done her best. She sent money to her parents when they needed it, paid bills, helped when things broke down around the house. She wasn't asked to do it, but it was a way of showing that she cared, that she was trying to make her mark on a family that often overlooked her. She would help with the small things, paying for repairs, picking up groceries, but it was never acknowledged. Emily had become used to it. The silence, the lack of recognition. She had long since stopped expecting anything from her family. It was easier to keep her head down, to keep working, and to stop hoping for any form of validation. Yet, despite the emotional distance, Emily still craved one thing: acknowledgement. Just once. She wanted her family to recognize her for who she was, for what she had achieved. Not in the way they recognized Ben, but in her own way. She wanted to be seen, to be valued. It wasn't that she wanted her family to shower her with praise. She simply wanted them to understand her, to see that she was doing something meaningful. But with each passing year, it seemed like that moment was slipping further away. As she sat at her desk one morning, sipping her coffee and preparing for another day of meetings and brainstorming sessions, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had built a successful business. She had proven herself in an industry dominated by men, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something she was searching for. The answer came unexpectedly, in the form of a simple text message from her cousin Rachel. It was an invitation to the family dinner, but there was something about it that felt different. Something about the way Rachel worded it made Emily think maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time she would finally feel seen. But as the evening drew near, Emily knew deep down that nothing would change. Her family's view of her wouldn't change, and the cycle would repeat itself. Ben would be the star of the show, and she would quietly fade into the background once again. But that night, something felt different. The moment of reckoning was closer than she realized. The day of the family dinner arrived, and Emily found herself pacing around her apartment, unsure of what to do. She had never looked forward to these gatherings, not since childhood, but this time felt different. For some reason, she had hoped, albeit weakly, that this would be the moment her family would finally see her. But deep down, she knew better. It had been a few weeks since she received the text from Rachel, inviting her to the family dinner. Rachel, always the one with the good intentions, had mentioned that Ben's girlfriend would be bringing her parents, and the family was gathering to celebrate Ben's latest promotion. Emily wasn't sure what the exact reason for the dinner was, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had been included, or so she thought. When she called to confirm the details, her father's voice was curt. It was the kind of tone that made Emily feel small, as if the weight of her father's words could bend her to his will without even needing to raise his voice. "Hey, Dad, I just wanted to confirm I'll be coming by around 6. Is that good?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice light, as though the nerves bubbling inside her weren't there. Her father's reply was quick, but the pause that followed made Emily's chest tighten. "Actually, maybe you shouldn't come this year," he said, his voice almost apologetic but still carrying an edge of finality. "Ben's bringing his girlfriend, and they're bringing her parents. It's important. We're keeping it small." Emily's heart dropped. A tightness spread through her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She tried to process what he had said, unsure whether he was worried about her schedule or if there was something else. She pressed on. "What do you mean, Dad?" "I was looking forward to coming. I cleared my schedule, and I thought we'd just have a quiet evening." Another pause. "I think it would be better if you didn't come this time, Emily. It'll be awkward, you know, with everything. Your brother's girlfriend's family is here," and his voice trailed off, as if the explanation itself wasn't necessary. Emily's stomach churned. She had been shut out before. Of course, it wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But hearing the finality in her father's words hit her like a cold slap. Are you saying, I'm not welcome? Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the hurt she hadn't expected to feel. Her father sighed, his voice softening just a little. Look, Em, it's just that with Ben's promotion and all, the focus needs to be on him. You know how these things go. The words stung more than she expected. Ben's promotion. Emily had been working tirelessly, building a company from the ground up. But somehow, her father's attention always seemed to be on Ben's latest achievement. She held the phone tight in her hand, her knuckles white, a sharp heat rising to her cheeks. Oh. Dad, she started, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. You're telling me I'm not welcome because Ben's promotion is more important than the things I've been doing. Are you saying I'm just a side note in this family? Her father's response was swift and cold. It's not about that. Emily, I just think it'll make things awkward for everyone. If you insist on coming, then don't bother calling me your father. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Emily could almost feel the invisible door slamming shut between them. And just like that, she was cast aside. The quiet hum of her apartment seemed to echo in the silence that followed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, staring at the cold cup of coffee on the table, the sound of her father's last words replaying in her mind. It was as if the world had cracked open. Her father had just told her without a hint of hesitation that she wasn't a part of this family's celebration. She set the phone down without saying anything further. Her family had always been distant, but this moment was different. It wasn't just emotional distance, it was physical rejection. For the first time, Emily realized that no matter what she did, no matter how successful she became, her place in the family had already been determined, and it wasn't one she was invited to. As the night wore on, Emily remained in her apartment, sitting in silence. The bitterness wasn't there at least. Not yet. What she felt instead was emptiness. It was a strange, suffocating feeling, one that she had never experienced before, a sense of being untethered, adrift in her own life. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much to get to where she was, and yet, when it came to the family that should have been proud of her, none of it mattered. It wasn't the first time she had been excluded. Of course, growing up, she had always been the other one. Ben was the one who brought home medals and accolades, who was adored by their parents and relatives alike. Emily, on the other hand, had always been quiet and reserved, more focused on her work than on fitting into the family's mold. The difference was clear from the start, and it was only growing with each passing year. But tonight, it stung more than usual. Tonight, it was clear no matter how much she gave, how much she sacrificed, she was always going to be the one left out. She thought she had made peace with that, but this final rejection, the banishment from a simple family dinner, shattered something inside her. It was the last straw. For hours, Emily sat there, her mind racing with thoughts. The clock on the wall ticked away, marking the time she had once hoped would be filled with family, warmth, and maybe, just maybe, a sense of belonging. But that wasn't to be. As she closed her laptop and tried to get some sleep, she couldn't help but think about what would come next. Maybe, just maybe, she was done trying. Done trying to be seen by people who had already made up their minds about her. The world outside was still turning, her company still thriving. But here, in the silence of her apartment, Emily realized something important. She didn't need their approval. And that was the first step toward freeing herself from the family that had always made her feel invisible. The following days were a blur for Emily. The rejection had lingered in her mind, replaying over and over. But as time passed, something unexpected started to shift. Instead of focusing on the hurt, the quiet anger, or the disillusionment with her family, she turned her attention to what she knew best: her work. Emily's startup was growing, and with it, the stakes. The pressure had always been there, but it was starting to feel like the one thing that truly belonged to her, something that no one could take away, not even her family. She had built this from the ground up, piece by piece, just as she had always done. The late nights, the endless coding, the frustrating pivots, all of it had led her here. Her company, which specialized in tech solutions for healthcare, had recently secured a major round of funding, something Emily had worked tirelessly for. The emails started pouring in from potential partners, investors, and even the media, recognizing her work and the company's success. There were moments where she stopped and thought about what her family might say if they knew how far she had come. But then she quickly dismissed it. They didn't deserve that piece of her anymore. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, Emily decided to double down on what she loved. She spent long hours at the office, working with her co-founders, meeting with clients, and pushing her company toward new milestones. The more she immersed herself in the world of business, the clearer it became that her worth wasn't tied to her family's approval. It was defined by the work she was doing, by the impact she was making. And for the first time in years, Emily felt a sense of purpose that wasn't rooted in seeking validation from others. It was late one Wednesday evening when the phone rang. Emily glanced at the screen, and her stomach dropped. It was her cousin Rachel. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure if she wanted to pick up, but curiosity got the better of her. "Hey, Em," Rachel's voice came through, sounding unusually warm. "I know things have been a little tense lately, but I wanted to check in with you." Emily didn't immediately respond, her fingers tapping on her desk, unsure how to react. The idea of talking to her family felt foreign, especially after everything that had happened. "I'm fine, Rachel," Emily said, her voice flat. "I just don't think there's much to talk about right now." There was a moment of silence before Rachel spoke again. "I get it. Really, I do. But there's something you should know." Rachel paused, her tone turning more serious. "After the dinner, things have been a bit chaotic. Mom and Dad, they're starting to realize that maybe they haven't been fair to you. They've been talking about it a lot lately." Emily felt a flicker of emotion stir inside her, but she quickly pushed it aside. She didn't want to get her hopes up. She had spent too many years trying to gain their approval, only to be shut down at every turn. "I'm not interested in hearing apologies that come too late, Rachel," Emily replied. "I've moved on. I've built something that matters to me." Rachel's voice softened. "I know. I'm not asking for you to forgive everything overnight. I just wanted to let you know that things are changing. They're realizing what they've missed." Emily sighed, leaning back in her chair. The idea that her parents were realizing something felt strange to her. After all, they had never once taken the time to understand her work, her life, her aspirations. It wasn't as simple as realizing they had been wrong. "I'm glad they're finally seeing something, I guess," Emily said. "But it doesn't change anything. I'm not going back to pretending I'm okay with the way they've treated me." Rachel hesitated. "I understand. But, just think about it. Things don't have to stay the way they are forever. Maybe there's room for healing, if you're willing to give it a chance." Emily took a deep breath, trying to sift through the emotions she had buried deep within. It was tempting, this idea of mending things with her family. But she couldn't deny that a part of her felt like she was holding herself back by waiting for them to catch up. "I'll think about it," Emily said finally, though the words felt hollow. But no promises. She hung up the phone and stared out of her office window. The city was quiet at this hour, the lights of the buildings casting long shadows on the streets below. Emily wasn't sure what the future held with her family, but she knew she couldn't keep waiting for them to come around. She had waited long enough. The next morning, as Emily sat in her office, preparing for a major meeting with a new client, her thoughts kept drifting back to that phone call. She didn't want to be the person who held on to old wounds forever, but she also wasn't ready to let her family back in without a clear understanding of how things needed to change. She had always tried to be the good daughter, the one who quietly took care of everything, who did what was expected of her, but no more. Emily had learned that self-worth couldn't be built on the approval of others. No matter how close those others were, it had to come from within. When the meeting started, Emily put her thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. The client she was meeting with was a major player in the healthcare industry, and securing this deal could be a game changer for her company. She knew she had to be on her A game. As the meeting went on, she felt the familiar rush of confidence that came with being in control of her work. The presentation went smoothly, and by the end of it, they were discussing terms. Emily couldn't help but smile, feeling a sense of pride. This was what mattered to her now: the work, the challenges, the victories. When the meeting ended, she left the conference room with a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about landing another client. It was about reaffirming to herself that her worth wasn't defined by her family or anyone else. She was more than just the other one. She was the one who built something. She was the one who made a difference. As she returned to her desk, Emily felt a sudden surge of clarity. She wasn't going to chase after anyone's approval anymore, not from her family, not from anyone. She was on her own path now, and it was time to stop looking back. The next chapter of her life was already unfolding, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone hold her back. A few days passed in a blur, and the weight of Emily's decision to focus solely on her career and herself began to feel more natural. The thought of her family and their shifting attitudes seemed less important by the day. Emily had spent years quietly battling for a place in her family's life. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was no longer running after something that might never come. It was an oddly liberating feeling. Her thoughts were interrupted one morning when her assistant, Claire, popped her head into Emily's office. "Ms. Warren, there's someone here to see you. He says he's a friend of your cousin Rachel and that it's important." Emily looked up from the email she was drafting. A friend of Rachel. Her curiosity piqued. She gestured for Claire to let the person in. Moments later, a man stepped into her office, a man she didn't recognize at all. He was tall, dressed in a sleek navy suit, with a confident stride that immediately caught her attention. His eyes locked onto hers as soon as he entered, and a slight smirk appeared on his lips. "Ms. Emily Warren?" he asked. His voice smooth, almost casual. Emily nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, I'm Emily. How can I help you?" The man stepped forward, extending a hand. "James? James Prescott. I'm an old friend of Rachel's. We've met before, but I don't think you'd remember. I think it's safe to say we're all part of the same family." In some sense. Emily felt a pang of recognition as she shook his hand. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't quite place him. "I'm afraid I don't recall meeting you," she said, trying to keep the conversation casual. James gave a small laugh. "No worries. You wouldn't. But I'm sure Rachel has told you about me. Ben's girlfriend. Claire. That's where we've crossed paths." The mention of Ben caught Emily off guard. Her brother, Ben was a name she had long associated with success, with the family's undivided attention. But this wasn't just about him. This was about Claire and, for some reason, this stranger who seemed oddly comfortable in her space. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, James," Emily said, though she was trying to figure out why Rachel, or Ben for that matter, would send someone like him to her office. "I know this might sound a little odd, but I wanted to speak with you," James said, taking a seat in front of her desk. "I've heard quite a bit about you, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You're doing some incredible work with your company." Emily sat back, slightly taken aback by his directness. "Thank you," she said, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "I'm just doing my job." James smiled, though his eyes remained serious. "No, it's more than that. You're building something that's going to make waves in your industry. I've been following your progress from afar, and I have to admit, I didn't realize how much you had accomplished." His words caught Emily off guard. She had been so used to her family treating her accomplishments as mere side notes, dismissing them in favor of Ben's obvious success. But here was a stranger, a man who didn't know her personally, acknowledging her work, treating it as significant. "I appreciate that," Emily replied, her voice calm. "But I'm curious. Why are you here?" "Exactly." James shifted in his seat, seeming to hesitate for a moment before speaking again. "I know this might sound a little strange, but I think you should know something. Ben's family, your family, has no idea what they've been missing out on." Emily raised an eyebrow. Her attention piqued even more. "What do you mean?" James leaned forward, his tone lowering slightly. "They've always treated you like an afterthought, haven't they? Ben's the one they're proud of, the one they talk about. And you've always been in the background." The words hit Emily harder than she expected. She had spent so much of her life feeling invisible, sidelined in favor of Ben's more obvious accomplishments. And yet, here was a stranger, someone she had never met before, saying things she had long felt, but never voiced. "I'm not here to make you feel bad," James continued, his voice steady but kind. "But I wanted you to hear this from someone who knows what it's like. Ben is a great guy, but he doesn't see you the way you deserve to be seen, and neither do your parents. The way they've treated you, it's wrong." Emily felt a mix of emotions flood her. She didn't know this man, yet somehow, he was acknowledging the pain she had carried silently for years. It wasn't just that he understood her. It was that he could see her for who she really was, not as the quiet sister, the one who always took a back seat, but as a person who had worked hard, built something real, and had earned her place in the world. She swallowed hard before speaking again. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't think it matters anymore." James paused, his gaze unwavering. "It matters to you, and it matters to me, too." He leaned back in his chair and regarded her quietly for a moment. "What I'm saying is that it's time for you to stop waiting for their approval. You've already proved yourself. You don't need them to validate you." The sincerity in his voice struck a chord deep within Emily. For so long, she had been chasing after something that she knew, deep down, would never come. She had tried to prove herself to her family, to show them that she mattered. But no matter what she did, it always felt like she was invisible to them. And in a way, that was true because they had never truly seen her for who she was. James wasn't the first person to acknowledge her worth, but for some reason, his words hit harder than any compliment or recognition she had received from her family. Perhaps it was because, unlike them, he wasn't invested in seeing her a certain way. He didn't have expectations or biases. He was simply seeing her as she was successful, strong, and worthy. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a shift inside her. She didn't need to wait for her family's approval anymore. She had already built something real, and that was enough. She had stopped needing their validation, but hearing it from someone who didn't owe her anything gave her the courage to finally let go of the need to prove herself. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady. "That means more than you know." James stood up, smiling warmly at her. "You've got this. Emily, I believe in you. Just remember you don't need anyone else's approval to be great." As he left her office, Emily sat in the silence that followed, the weight of his words settling in. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, nor was it a grand epiphany. It was simply the quiet realization that her worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's recognition. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she wasn't going to wait for her family to see her. She had already made her mark in the world, and now it was time to live unapologetically, without the need for approval. The next chapter of her life had already begun, and Emily was ready for it. The following week, things at work seemed to shift in ways that Emily hadn't anticipated. After the meeting with James, she found herself feeling lighter, more grounded in her own sense of self. It was as though the last few years of trying to seek validation had finally fallen away, replaced by a quiet confidence that had been buried for far too long. It wasn't just her attitude toward work that had changed. Emily's entire perspective had evolved. She had spent so much time trying to fit herself into the mold of what her family expected. And now, finally, she had begun to realize that she didn't need to do that anymore. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need to sacrifice her sense of worth for their version of who she should be. And the most surprising part was how much easier everything seemed after making that realization. At work, the meetings were smoother, the negotiations clearer, and even her co-founders noticed a shift in her energy. It was as if the pressure that had weighed on her for so long had finally lifted, and in its place was a newfound sense of clarity. Yet, despite all the success, there was still the shadow of her family's rejection lingering at the back of her mind. It wasn't something she could simply forget. That night, she found herself sitting in her apartment, staring out the window, watching the city lights flicker as the world outside continued moving. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She hesitated, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. When she opened the door, her stomach sank. Standing there was Rachel, holding a small bag in her hands and looking as if she hadn't slept in days. "Hey, Em," Rachel said softly, her eyes avoiding direct contact for a moment. "Can I come in?" Emily stepped aside to let her cousin enter, though a small knot of unease twisted in her stomach. Rachel had always been the bridge between Emily and the rest of the family, the one who tried to keep the peace, the one who would often come to Emily with apologies on behalf of others. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, unsure of what to expect. Rachel sighed, sitting down on the couch, her hands clutching the bag tightly. "It's Mom and Dad, and Ben. They're all really sorry for what happened with the dinner. They know they hurt you, and they want to make things right." Emily felt a mix of disbelief and exhaustion at hearing these words. She had spent years hoping for this moment, the moment where her family would finally realize how wrong they were, where they would admit their mistakes and offer an apology. But now that it was happening, she wasn't sure she even wanted it anymore. "I'm not sure what you're asking." "Rachel," Emily said quietly, sitting across from her, "what do you want me to do with that?" Rachel looked down at the bag in her hands, her voice softening. "I don't know. I think they all just wanted to apologize. They've been talking about how they've treated you, and they realize they've taken you for granted. They want you to know that they see you now." Emily sat still, processing her cousin's words. The idea of her family realizing their mistakes was tempting, but at the same time, it felt like too little, too late. She had spent so much of her life feeling invisible, trying to prove herself to people who would never truly see her. Could an apology now really make a difference? I appreciate that they've come to this realization, Emily said slowly, her eyes meeting Rachel's. But it doesn't change the fact that they've treated me this way for years. It doesn't change the hurt that's been caused. Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. I get it. I know you've been hurt. But Emily, I think they're finally seeing the truth, and they want to fix it. I don't know if that helps, but I just thought you should know. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. A part of her wanted to believe that this was a turning point, that maybe, just maybe, her family was finally ready to accept her for who she was. But another part of her, the part that had been ignored and dismissed for so long, wasn't sure it was worth the effort anymore. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. I don't know, Rachel. I've spent so much time waiting for them to see me, to finally understand my worth. But the truth is, I've already moved on. I've built something real. I'm not waiting for their approval anymore. I'm not going to keep putting myself in a position where I'm always the one who's expected to make things right. Rachel was silent for a moment, before finally standing up and walking toward Emily. I know. I understand. But I think you should know that they're really trying. They don't want to lose you. Emily turned to face her cousin, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Maybe they should have thought of that sooner. As Rachel left, Emily stood by the door, feeling the familiar weight of old wounds that hadn't quite healed. The apology, while heartfelt, didn't feel like the solution she had hoped for. She had spent so much time longing for acceptance. But now she realized that the only acceptance that truly mattered was the one she had learned to give herself. The following days were quieter than usual. Emily threw herself back into her work, diving into the ongoing projects and planning the next steps for her company. But there was still a lingering sense of relief, as though something inside her had finally clicked into place. She no longer needed to carry the burden of her family's expectations. She was free from the emotional weight that had held her captive for so long. But even as she worked, Emily found herself thinking about what Rachel had said. Her family was trying, but did it matter now? Hadn't she already made the choice to move forward without them? Was there a way to truly heal these wounds? Or had too much time passed as she sat in her office, scrolling through reports? Emily realized that there were no easy answers. The road to healing, whether with her family or within herself, wasn't a simple one. But it was her road to travel, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt ready to walk it, wherever it might lead. As the weeks passed, Emily's world seemed to stabilize in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had built something meaningful and sustainable. Her company was thriving, her colleagues were supportive, and she was finally beginning to feel a sense of peace with herself. Despite the lingering discomfort of her family's recent attempts at reconciliation, Emily knew deep down that her life had taken on a new direction. She had stopped waiting for them to validate her. She was already building her own future. But even with this newfound clarity, there were moments when she felt the sting of rejection creep back in. Her phone, which had been silent for days, lit up with a text from Rachel late one evening. Emily picked it up, her stomach tightening as she read the message. I think you should talk to Mom and Dad. They're planning something big, and they want to make it up to you. Please, just hear them out. Emily stared at the screen for a long moment. The words felt heavy in her hands. Could she really give them another chance? Was it possible for things to be different? Or was it just another attempt to make her feel like she was still a part of their world? She thought about the countless times she had tried to be seen, the countless times her parents had overlooked her, as if she were merely a footnote in the family story. She thought about her father's harsh words, how he had told her to stay away from that dinner. Those words had stung. And the absence of her presence at that gathering had been a moment she couldn't easily shake off. But something inside her had changed since then. Emily had started to realize that she didn't need to be a part of their world in the way they wanted her to be. She had started to see that their vision of her didn't define who she truly was. Still, the temptation lingered. The idea of her family trying to make things right was a seductive one. She wasn't sure if it was her heart or her mind that needed to make the decision. She had been hurt by them for so long, but she couldn't ignore the fact that they were reaching out now. Was this their genuine attempt at change, or were they simply trying to fix their own guilt? After a few minutes, Emily composed a response. "I'll think about it. Rachel, I don't know what I can say, but I'll think about it." She put her phone down and stared at the city skyline. The world was moving outside her window, but inside, Emily found herself suspended between two realities: the person she had always been in her family's eyes, and the person she was now, strong, capable, and building a future of her own. The next morning, as she walked into her office, she felt the familiar rush of excitement. Her team was on track with their current project, and her company's brand was beginning to gain more recognition. It was a gratifying feeling, one that she had always worked toward, and it made her heart swell with pride. But that nagging thought about her family still lingered at the back of her mind. By the time the afternoon rolled around, Emily was deep in a meeting when she received another message from Rachel. "I think they've planned a small gathering. They really want you to be there. It's not about Ben this time, Em. It's about making things right with you." The words hung heavy in the air. Was this their way of finally acknowledging her? Was this the family she had always hoped for? The one that would finally see her, truly see her for who she was, beyond the comparisons to Ben? Or was it just another fleeting moment of temporary remorse? A pitiful attempt to undo years of hurt? Emily closed her laptop, her mind racing. She had been down this road before. She had spent so much time trying to fit into the image of the family they wanted her to be, a version of herself that would be accepted. But that Emily was gone now. The truth was, she didn't need their validation to define her worth. She had spent years thinking she wasn't enough because they had never shown her love the way she needed it. But she had proven herself, not to them, but to herself. And yet, despite all the clarity she had gained, the idea of seeing her parents again, of facing the family that had dismissed her for so long, still unsettled her. Could she really walk away from this moment? Could she just let go and move forward? Or did she owe it to herself to finally hear them out, for the first time in a long while? Emily realized that this wasn't about them anymore. This wasn't about fixing what was broken with her family. This was about her. It was about choosing the path that was best for her, whether it was forgiving them or walking away for good. After a long moment of contemplation, she made a decision. She needed to do this on her own terms. She wasn't going to walk into that room and let them dictate how she should feel. She needed to set boundaries, and she needed to be clear with herself about what she expected from them, if anything at all. A few hours later, Emily found herself sitting in front of her phone, drafting a message to Rachel. It wasn't easy to type, but she knew it was the right thing to do. "Tell them I'm not coming," she typed, her fingers hovering over the send button. "I'm not angry anymore. I just don't need them in the way they want me to be. I'm building my own life now. If they want to be a part of it, they'll have to meet me where I am." She paused for a moment before hitting send. The message felt final, like a door closing on a chapter of her life she had been holding on to for far too long. But it wasn't a door she had slammed shut. It was simply one she had walked away from, knowing that she had nothing left to prove. The moment she hit send, Emily felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. The decision had been made, and she no longer had to live in the shadow of what might have been. Her future was now fully in her hands. As the sun set outside her office, Emily knew she was on the right path. The journey ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, she was walking it on her own terms. The shadows of her past no longer held her back. She was free to live the life she had always dreamed of. As the days passed following her decision to set boundaries with her family, Emily felt an unexpected calm settle over her. She had expected to feel some form of regret, or perhaps guilt, but there was only clarity. The weight of constantly trying to please her family, to prove her worth, had been lifted, and in its place was a sense of freedom. She no longer needed to carry the emotional baggage of years spent trying to earn love and acceptance from people who never truly understood her. In the weeks that followed, Emily threw herself into her work more than ever. The success of her company was undeniable. Clients were signing on. The media was starting to take notice, and her leadership was becoming a model in the tech industry. She had become a rising star, a force to be reckoned with in her field. The confidence that came with her professional achievements filled the gaps left by the absence of family approval. For the first time in her life, Emily felt like she was truly living for herself. But there were still moments when the ghost of her family would sneak into her thoughts. The memories of Thanksgiving dinners where she was left in the background. The birthdays where her parents forgot to even acknowledge her. All of those moments that built up over time and shaped the way she saw herself. But now, when those memories surfaced, they didn't sting like they once did. Instead, they were just pieces of a past she was no longer defined by. One evening, as Emily was reviewing a proposal in her office, her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. She hadn't spoken to her cousin in weeks, and the thought of hearing from her now stirred something inside Emily. After a brief pause, she opened the message. I think you need to hear this. It began. Mom and Dad are planning a trip to Boston next month, and they really want to see you. They said they'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Please think about it. They miss you. For a moment, Emily was paralyzed. The thought of her parents trying to make amends had been something she had longed for in the past. But now, it felt like an intrusion into the life she had built for herself. She had moved on from the idea of them being a part of her world. But was this a genuine attempt to heal, or just another token gesture to ease their guilt? She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. The truth was, she had been hurt, deeply, and no matter how much they apologized or how much they tried to make up for the past, there was still a part of her that couldn't forget how they had treated her. It was more than just the dinner incident. It was years of feeling like she didn't matter, years of being invisible while her brother took center stage. But something had changed in Emily. She wasn't the same person who had spent years waiting for her family to recognize her. She was strong. She had built a life that was hers, separate from their expectations, and she had learned that self-worth didn't come from others, it came from within. I've moved on. Rachel, Emily typed, her fingers steady as she replied. I appreciate them reaching out. But I've built a life here. I've created something real, and I'm not going back to the way things were. I'm okay. After sending the message, Emily took a deep breath. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. She wasn't closing herself off from healing. She was simply recognizing that she didn't need her family's approval to be whole. She was already enough. The next few weeks were filled with work, new opportunities, and small victories. Emily was living her life on her own terms, and it felt good. Her startup was on the brink of securing its largest partnership yet. and the feeling of success fueled her every move. She had surrounded herself with people who saw her, who appreciated her for who she was and what she had built, not just for what she could do for them. It was a refreshing change from the dynamics she had grown up with. One evening, as Emily sat in her office reviewing a financial report, there was a knock at the door. She looked up, expecting one of her team members. But instead, it was James, the same James who had made her realize her worth during their conversation a few months ago. He smiled as he entered, his presence somehow reassuring. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice warm. "But I wanted to congratulate you in person. I heard about the partnership. This is a huge milestone for you." Emily smiled back, the sincerity in his words reminding her once again of how far she had come. "Thanks, James. It's been a lot of hard work, but we're getting there." James sat across from her, his demeanor casual yet attentive. "You're not just getting there, Emily. You've already made it. I've watched you transform into someone who not only leads but inspires. And it's been incredible to see." His words felt like a balm to the parts of her that had once longed for acknowledgement. The parts that had been silenced by years of trying to earn her family's approval. James wasn't just complimenting her accomplishments, he was acknowledging the person she had become. And for the first time, it felt like it was enough. She didn't need validation from anyone else to recognize the strength within herself. "I've been thinking about something," James continued, his tone turning a bit more serious. "There's something to be said about people who don't let the past define them, who don't let the world tell them who they are. You've done that, Emily. You've taken the reins of your life, and it's inspiring. I just want you to know that I see that." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that resonated deeply within Emily. She hadn't realized just how much she had internalized the struggle of trying to be seen, to be valued by those who hadn't done so for so long. And now, as she sat in her office, looking at the company she had built and the life she had created, she realized something powerful. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. She had already proven herself to the most important person, herself. The rest of the evening passed in a blur as Emily and James discussed business matters. But the conversation had lingered in her mind long after he left. The validation she had once sought from her family, from anyone who might recognize her, was no longer necessary. She was at peace, and that peace came from within. The next morning, as Emily sat by her window, sipping coffee and preparing for the day ahead, she realized that her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more milestones, but she was no longer waiting for anyone to give her permission to succeed. She was free to live the life she had always dreamed of, without the past holding her back. And for the first time in years, Emily felt truly alive. Emily's life continued to evolve with every passing day. The sense of peace she had found wasn't fleeting. It was anchored in the knowledge that she had chosen herself, that her worth wasn't dependent on the approval or recognition of others. She had finally stepped into her own power, and it was liberating. Her company's growth was exponential. Each success felt sweeter than the last. She had reached a point where her name was being recognized in business circles, where she was invited to speak at conferences and panel discussions. It wasn't just her professional achievements that had changed, though Emily had undergone a quiet personal transformation as well. She had stopped doubting herself, stopped trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. One afternoon, after signing off on a major deal, Emily was heading out of the office to meet her team when she received an unexpected phone call. Her heart skipped when she saw that it was from her mother. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Her instinct was to ignore it, to keep moving forward with her life the way she had been. But something told her that this call was different. Perhaps it was because she had heard nothing from them in weeks. Or maybe because, Deep down, she knew this moment had to come sooner or later. With a deep breath, Emily answered the phone. "Hello? Mom?" "Emily." Her mother's voice came through, a slight tremor in it. I didn't think you'd pick up, but I wanted to talk to you." Emily felt her heart thud in her chest. Her mother's tone was softer than usual, and there was something in it that caught her attention. "What's going on, Mom?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before her mother spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you. About us. I know I've never said this before, but I'm sorry. For everything." The words hung in the air like a weight that Emily hadn't known she was still carrying. She had heard apologies before. Of course, empty ones. Hollow ones. Words spoken to quiet the discomfort in a moment. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't just a superficial apology. There was a sincerity in her mother's voice that Emily hadn't heard before. "Mom. I—" Emily started, but her words faltered. She wasn't sure how to respond, unsure of what this moment truly meant. "I've been selfish." "Emily," her mother continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I've always focused on Ben, on his successes, and I never really saw you for who you were. I didn't appreciate what you were doing, how hard you worked. I took you for granted, and I'm sorry." There was a quiet pause, and Emily's heart twisted in her chest. All the years of feeling invisible, of trying to earn her family's love and respect, came rushing back. But there was something different now. The hurt was still there, but it wasn't the raw, sharp pain it had once been. It was a dull ache, one that had faded over time, one that had less of a hold on her now that she had found her strength outside of her family's approval. "I've built my own life now." "Mom," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I don't need you to see me in the way I once hoped for. I've learned that my worth isn't tied to your validation." Her mother's voice softened, understanding lacing her words. "I know. I realize that now. More than ever. I just needed to tell you that I see you. I see you for who you really are." The words, though simple, were enough. Emily had spent years wanting to hear them, wanting to be acknowledged for who she was, not just as the other child, the quiet one. And now, for the first time, her mother was seeing her, truly seeing her. "I'm glad to hear that," Emily said, her voice steady, the tension easing from her shoulders. "But I want you to understand that this isn't about you making up for the past. It's about me knowing who I am. I don't need you to fix anything anymore. I'm okay." Her mother sighed softly on the other end of the line, and Emily could hear the weight of her own emotions in that sound. "I'm proud of you. Emily, I don't think I've ever said that, but I am. I'm proud of the woman you've become." For a moment, Emily didn't know how to respond. Her mother's words were both comforting and bittersweet. She had spent years yearning for them, and now they were here. But they didn't change the past. They didn't change the years of feeling unseen, but somehow, that was okay now. Emily had grown beyond those years, beyond that need for approval. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly. "I appreciate that." There was another silence before her mother spoke again. "Will you come visit us? We can't fix everything in one conversation, but maybe we could start over." Emily thought about the request for a long moment. The idea of visiting her family, of re-entering that world that had always been so difficult, was a daunting one. But something about her mother's vulnerability made her pause. It wasn't the perfect family reunion she had once dreamed of, but it was a step forward, a step toward healing. "I'll think about it," Emily said finally, "but I'm not sure I'm ready yet." Her mother's voice softened, a hint of understanding in it. "I understand, sweetheart. Just know that the door is open." After they hung up, Emily sat in her office for a long time, the phone resting quietly in her hand. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't the resolution she had once imagined, but it was a step, and it was enough. As she sat there, reflecting on everything that had led her to this point, Emily realized that this was the final piece of the puzzle. She had already built a life without her family's approval. She had already found peace within herself, a peace that no one else could take away. The door her mother had offered her was not one that Emily needed to walk through right away, but the fact that it was there that they had made the first move. Even if it wasn't everything she had hoped for was enough. It was the beginning of something new, something different, and this time, it was on Emily's terms. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Emily knew one thing for sure: she was no longer bound by the past. She was free to define herself, to create the future she had always dreamed of, and that was more than enough. As Emily continued to navigate the complexities of her life, she found herself in a place where the balance between work, personal growth, and family was finally beginning to feel more manageable. She had learned the importance of setting boundaries, of knowing when to walk away, and when to let things unfold naturally. But the past few months had reminded her that life, with all its messy moments, was about the journey, not the destination. And it was okay to let things evolve in their own time. After the phone call with her mother, Emily allowed herself to be present with the reality of what had happened. She wasn't jumping at the idea of reuniting with her family. In fact, there was a part of her that was still cautious, protective of the life she had created and the peace she had fought so hard to find. But for the first time, she wasn't angry. The bitterness that had once defined so much of her emotional landscape was no longer there. She continued to pour her energy into her company, which was thriving in ways that exceeded her expectations. The clients were coming in, the product was evolving, and Emily was becoming more comfortable in her role as a leader. There were still challenges to face, but they felt like obstacles to overcome, not insurmountable walls. The confidence that had once been crushed by the constant need for validation from her family had been replaced by something much stronger, an unshakable sense of self. It wasn't just the business that had changed. Emily had also started to open herself up to new experiences in her personal life. She had kept her friendships close, but she had never allowed herself to fully embrace the idea of love. After all the years of being overlooked, the idea of being vulnerable to someone else's affections was daunting. Yet Emily had begun to realize that in order to fully move forward, she needed to embrace every part of herself, not just the independent, strong parts, but also the parts that still longed for connection. One Saturday afternoon, as Emily sat at a local cafe sipping her coffee, her phone buzzed with a message from James. She had gotten used to his occasional check-ins, mostly business-related, but this message was different. There was a sense of warmth in it that made her pause. "Hey, Em, I know you're busy, but I wanted to see if you'd be interested in joining me for dinner tonight. Just the two of us. No business, just a meal. I think we both could use a break." Emily smiled at the simplicity of the request. For so long, she had isolated herself from the idea of companionship, fearing that allowing anyone too close might mean being vulnerable. But here, with James, it felt different. Their relationship had always been grounded in mutual respect and understanding. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people who appreciated each other's company. After a moment of hesitation, Emily typed back, "Sounds great. Where are we meeting?" That evening, they met at a small Italian restaurant not far from Emily's apartment. The atmosphere was cozy, intimate without being overwhelming. They ordered their food and settled into a comfortable rhythm, talking about everything and nothing at all. There were no grand declarations or intense emotional conversations, just two people enjoying each other's presence. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of ease that had nothing to do with her accomplishments or her family's expectations. It was simply about being, in the moment, with someone who saw her for who she was. As the evening wore on, James surprised her with a gentle question, one that made her heart skip a beat. He said, his voice softer than usual. I've been meaning to ask you this for a while. I admire the way you've handled everything your business, your life. You're strong, and you've got this amazing drive. But is there someone you're doing it for? Is there anyone in your life who you're doing this all for? The question caught Emily off guard. For a moment, she wasn't sure how to answer. She had been so focused on building her own future that she hadn't really allowed herself to think about the people who mattered beyond her work. She had kept her distance from the idea of romantic relationships, and even from some of her closest friends, always prioritizing her goals over her personal needs. I used to think I was doing it for my family, Emily said, her voice thoughtful. I thought that if I worked hard enough, they would finally see me, finally be proud of me. But the truth is, I've been doing it for myself. I've learned that I have to create the life I want on my own, without depending on anyone else's approval. James nodded, his gaze steady. I can see that. And it's incredible what you've built. But I think there's room for someone else in your life, too. You deserve that. You deserve someone who sees you, who respects what you've done, but also someone who can be there with you, someone who can share in your joy, not just your struggles. Emily's heart fluttered at his words, the vulnerability in his voice, the way he truly seemed to understand her, made her realize something important maybe, just maybe. It was time to let someone else in. She wasn't sure if she was ready for anything beyond their friendship, but the thought of sharing her life with someone who didn't judge her for her past, someone who accepted her for who she had become, was a possibility she hadn't considered in a long time. I think you're right, Emily said quietly, her eyes meeting his. I've spent so much time focusing on building my career, my life, that I haven't really allowed myself to embrace the idea of sharing it with someone. But maybe that's something I need to start doing. James smiled, his eyes warm. Whenever you're ready. No pressure. As the evening ended, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. She wasn't rushing into anything, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had room in her life for both her personal success and the possibility of connection. It was a delicate balance, one that she had never quite known how to achieve, but she was learning. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily realized that her journey had taken her to a place of true self-acceptance. She didn't need to be defined by her past, by her family, or by anyone else's expectations. She had created a life that was uniquely hers, a life that she was proud of, a life that was filled with purpose, strength, and the potential for love. And with that realization, Emily finally understood what it meant to truly live for herself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that she was enough just as she was. As the months passed, Emily's life continued to unfold in ways she hadn't expected. The walls she had built around herself, both professionally and personally, had begun to soften. With James, her friendship blossomed into something deeper. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but there was an undeniable connection. He respected her independence, her drive, and her ambition. But he also showed her the joy of slowing down, of allowing herself to be cared for without the pressure of perfection. For the first time, Emily felt what it was like to be seen, not just for what she could do, but for who she was. Her company reached new heights. As she gained more recognition in the business world, her peers began to respect her not just for her accomplishments, but for the authenticity she brought to her work. Emily had found a way to balance ambition and self-care, something she had always struggled with. She realized that success wasn't just about achieving goals, it was about finding peace in the process and knowing when to take a step back and breathe. Still, there were times when the echoes of her family's rejection crept into her thoughts. Though she had decided not to re-enter their lives on their terms, there were moments when she wondered what it would feel like to truly make peace with them. After all, she had spent so much of her life longing for their approval, and even though she no longer needed it, the desire for resolution remained. But the more she thought about it, the more she understood that peace with them would not come through their actions alone. It had to come from her. One evening, as she and James sat on her balcony, sipping wine and watching the sun dip behind the horizon, Emily found herself opening up in a way she hadn't before. The vulnerability she had guarded for so long was slowly starting to slip away. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Emily began, her voice thoughtful, "about my family. I've decided that I can't let them control my happiness anymore. I can't let their rejection be the thing that defines me. I've built my life without them. But sometimes, I still wonder what it would be like if they could just see me for who I really am. Not just the daughter they wanted me to be, but the person I've become." James didn't interrupt. He simply listened, his gaze steady and understanding. "You've already done the hard part, Em," James said softly after a moment. "You've found peace within yourself. That's something a lot of people never manage to do. And if your family ever sees that, if they ever understand who you are and what you've accomplished, that's their journey, not yours. You don't need them to define you anymore." Emily nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I know you're right. I've spent so much of my life waiting for them to see me, and now I realize I don't need them to. I see myself. I've worked so hard to get here, to become the person I am. I've built something that I can be proud of, and I don't need their approval for that." James reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "You don't need anyone's approval, Emily. You're more than enough just as you are. You've proven that to yourself. The rest is just icing on the cake." His words were comforting, but it wasn't just his words that resonated with Emily. It was the quiet confidence in his voice, the sincerity with which he spoke. She had spent so long trying to prove herself to others, especially her family. But now, she understood that the only validation that mattered was her own. She had built something meaningful, not for anyone else's benefit, but for herself. That was all that mattered. The following days passed by in a peaceful blur. Emily was still deeply immersed in her work, but she also made more room for herself, time to relax, to explore new hobbies, and to spend more moments with the people who truly cared for her. She had come to realize that success wasn't just about the long hours and the constant drive. It was about balance and finding joy in the moments between the work. And then, out of the blue, Emily received a letter from her parents. It wasn't a phone call or a text message, but a physical letter, something that felt old-fashioned but also meaningful. It was addressed simply to Emily with no return address. Her heart raced as she opened it. The letter was short but full of emotion. It was her mother, acknowledging the distance that had grown between them and apologizing for the years of hurt. She expressed regret for the way she and her father had treated Emily, for not seeing her for who she truly was, for not offering the love and support she needed. There was no expectation, no pressure for Emily to respond in any particular way, just an honest admission of their mistakes and a hope that one day they could rebuild a relationship on more equal terms. For a moment, Emily sat silently, letting the words sink in. It wasn't the grand gesture she had once hoped for, nor was it an immediate invitation to return to the family fold. But it was a step. It was a small yet significant moment of acknowledgement, and that was enough. She sat down at her desk, took a deep breath, and began to write a letter in return. She didn't know where it would lead, or whether anything would change. But she knew one thing: she was finally ready to write her own ending. Her family would never define her again, but maybe, just maybe, they could begin to understand her journey. The days that followed were a blend of work, quiet reflection, and small moments of connection with James and her close friends. The letter from her parents had given her a sense of closure she hadn't expected, and though she didn't know what the future held with them, she was finally at peace with whatever came next. Emily had already built the life she wanted, a life that was hers, free from the constraints of expectations and the shadows of the past. She had created something that mattered, not just for the world to see, but for herself, and for the first time in her life, Emily understood that true success wasn't about being seen by others, it was about seeing herself and knowing, deep down, that she was enough. As she stood on the balcony one evening, looking out at the city she had come to love, Emily smiled. The journey had been long, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be, right here, in her own life, ready to face whatever the future held. Emily sat at her desk one late afternoon, the golden light of the setting sun spilling through the windows of her office, casting long shadows on the floor. She glanced at the email inbox on her screen, the usual flood of messages awaiting her attention, but she wasn't in a rush. For the first time in a long time, she was enjoying the peace. It had taken years of struggle, emotional exhaustion, and learning to let go. But here she was, exactly where she needed to be. It was strange how the quiet moments seemed the most fulfilling now. The mornings spent sipping coffee in solitude, the evenings spent with James, talking about everything and nothing, and the weekends when she allowed herself time to relax without guilt or the constant hum of deadlines. These were the moments she had longed for in her younger years, but never knew how to make space for. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove herself, fighting for a place in a family that never truly saw her, and at times, forgetting to enjoy the life she had built along the way. She thought about her parents and the letter they had sent, the one that had sat on her desk for days before she finally allowed herself to read it. The words her mother had written were kind, sincere, but it was clear that her family's attempt at reconciliation was on their terms, not hers. And that was okay. The apology, the acknowledgement, it was important, but it didn't define her anymore. Emily đã nhận ra rằng, sự đóng cửa không cần phải đến từ những người đã làm tổn thương cô. Nó có thể đến từ bên trong, và đó là những gì cô đã tìm thấy. Cô đã ngừng chờ đợi gia đình thừa nhận giá trị của mình. Thay vào đó, cô đã trao cho mình món quà đó, và thế là đủ. Cô ấy đã xây dựng một cuộc sống mà cô ấy có thể trở thành người chuyên nghiệp. Khi cô nhìn vào màn hình máy tính của mình, bản nháp email cho một đề xuất hợp tác mới được mở ra trước mặt cô. Cô cảm thấy một cảm giác thành tựu sâu sắc. Công ty của cô ấy đã phát triển, và cô ấy đã phát triển cùng với nó. Cô vẫn đang học, vẫn đang phát triển. Nhưng bây giờ, đó không phải là để chứng tỏ bản thân. Đó là về việc tiếp tục sáng tạo, vượt qua ranh giới và tận hưởng quá trình. Cô đã ngừng đo lường thành công của mình bằng kỳ vọng của người khác. Cô đo lường nó bằng sự thỏa mãn khi biết mình đang làm chính xác những gì cô muốn, theo cách cô muốn. James had been her anchor through much of this transformation. His unwavering support had allowed her to open up to the possibility of love, something she had shut off for so long. While their relationship wasn't yet defined by labels or expectations, there was a quiet understanding between them. He was someone she could share her life with, someone who appreciated her for who she was, not what she had accomplished, and that made all the difference. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to think about the future with a newfound sense of freedom. There were still things to be done, challenges to face, but now they felt like part of the journey, not the ultimate test. She had learned the hard way that success wasn't about reaching a destination, it was about embracing the moments in between. She had created a life that was full of possibility, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. She had become the kind of leader she always aspired to be, not by stepping on others to rise, but by lifting them up with her. Her company, her relationships, her personal growth all were reflections of the woman she had become. One night, as she and James sat on her balcony overlooking the city, she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the wine they were drinking or the lights of the city below. It was the warmth of knowing she had found something precious, not just in her achievements, but in the ability to live her life on her own terms. "This feels good," James said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Emily looked at him, a soft smile on her face. "It does. I think I'm finally where I'm meant to be." He reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You've earned it, Em. Everything you have, everything you've built, it's all because of you. And I'm lucky to be here, watching you." Emily squeezed his hand back, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. She wasn't looking for validation anymore. She had found it in the quiet moments, in the work she loved, and in the relationships that truly mattered. As the night stretched on, Emily gazed up at the stars above the city. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of her past holding her back. She had already made peace with it. The only thing left now was to keep moving forward, embracing whatever the future had in store. For once, she was content. She was living her truth, and nothing could take that away.